Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Filippak. He is a software arcanist at IdeaFlow, and I've interviewed both Jacob and Cody at IdeaFlow already, but we found each other through the bird masks that I have on Twitter, the dancing bird masks that I have on Twitter. So, welcome to the show, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And you post some interesting stuff and on Twitter, and you also call yourself a knowledge mancer. I really like that, and I like the software arcanist as well, and the fact that you're working on a note-taking app. I've done deep dives on knowledge management, as my listeners know. What's your take on knowledge management? What is knowledge management?
Okay, so first of all, knowledge mancer. This comes from a very good friend of mine, Vanek Nedovic, who lives here in Serbia, and he's the man who is the reason that I moved to Serbia when I fled Russia. So yeah, and at some point, like we were talking a lot about knowledge management and like generally mind, all those brainy intellectual things. And at some point, he just dubbed me knowledge mancer. And I loved that. And I loved the word. And so I just replaced my bio in many places with that word. Um, so, yeah. So by knowledge management, I think I understand the discipline of having different, like having different parts of your, like different interests of yours uh, in a neat and consistent way, uh, put somewhere, either in text or in some very precisely defined mimetic structure in your mind. When you have, I think the most important word here is discipline. So it's
Mm.
like knowledge management is about discipline, about what you know, what languages you speak, what you're learning, and keeping progress of all that. Not having like a big pile of stuff in your head, but having neat, orderly piles of
Mm.
separate things, and knowing how they are interconnected, because I believe it's very important in specifically probably in our age uh, to have many bridges between the disciplines that help us understand the world through multiple lenses at once.
Okay, yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of territory that we can go into there. I went and looked up the etymology of discipline. And so the etymology of discipline comes from Latin, disciplina, which means instruction and knowledge. And then it converted to or it combined with that, and that went to the Old French, and then the English came in and with its disciple,
Yeah,
and then collided with that to create discipline, mortification by scourging. So mortification, like I got to go look up what mortification means. But it's so interesting because the way that we use mortification means great embarrassment and shame, the action of subduing one's bodily desires. That's very interesting.
yeah. I
And
think it's the bleak outlook on the word by the Brits.
by the British, yeah, interesting. And it's funny because it does feel like it has two meanings, which I was going to bring up, which is the discipline,
Mhm.
the actual thing that you're studying in this sort of neat category, and then there's the discipline, which I apparently came from the British, which is
Mhm.
like just like this horrible thing that you have to do to yourself to make sure that you get the thing done, and
Yeah,
like this just like overbearing sort of like inner tyrant that makes sure that you
yeah.
actually do this thing. And I love it that both of those things got tied together. What were you talking about? And do you have any thoughts on what the ramble that I just went on?
Yeah, okay. I mostly had the former in mind,
Uh-huh.
the Latin thing about following the path of knowledge and in like inquire into things. But also, I think when you have a lot of stuff to track, you need uh, some process that makes things orderly, and that process feeds on itself, and then it becomes that like little tyrant living in your head. And so you have, so it's like two sides of one coin, in a way. So by becoming increasingly adept keeper of knowledge, you also become more disciplined in the
Yes.
bad way. So you start to
Yes.
uh, treat yourself not only with carrots of knowledge, but like with the stick of you should do this, you must obey your own rules and all this. And that happens.
It's so interesting because I'm in one of those right now. It's been a very like maybe I'll get sort of personal now, but I've been dealing with a chronic pain thing for about 10 years now. And about a month ago, I felt like I was away from it, that I was out of it. And now I'm back in it, and I don't understand why. And about a month ago, I had my system perfect. I had my to-do list perfect. And then as I've kind of descended back into the shadow work of figuring out what's going on with this chronic pain thing, I've now been kind of like ignoring my system, which I had built, which was a great system. And now it's
Mhm.
like building up in the background, and I've stopped adding to it. Now I have this thing. And we were talking about that a little bit before in the things that I sent you in order to fill out. And so it's so interesting, this tyrant that goes in the head. And we were talking about it, that you have various systems, and you have it, and it's all very informal, but then it's this mix of informal and formal, and then it becomes too formal, and that's when the tyrant comes back. Can you talk more about this from your end, and like how you work with this inner tyrant, which can in some ways can be really helpful, but then in other ways becomes overbearing? What's your thought on that?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, uh, my usual approach is like systematize things pretty much overly.
Mm.
So when I discovered Obsidian, like Rome Research, Obsidian, those were the first ones for me, and I stuck with Obsidian.
Mm.
Um, I Before doing actual work of like putting my notes in there, I invented a system of like marking up different files, different notes, like hashtags, and I created a note about how I should uh, mark up my other notes. And so it was like documentation kind of thing, as if I were making a new programming project.
App.
So
Yeah, yeah.
it's a lot of my programming internal like disciplinary master. That guy kind of leaped over to the note taking, and I started doing all these, and pretty soon, I mean, pretty fast, that became unbearable. So it was very difficult to add new notes, and so now I'm in the situation when where I have like a moderately large knowledge graph in Obsidian, and I want to use it and I want to add something to it. But at the same time, I don't want to go over all those strict rules because I don't think they're that necessary.
Yeah.
And so I believe in like resets, like to combat that over disciplined approach. I think you should go in like leaps of, okay, I allow myself to accumulate this uh, like these systemic rules about how I build
Mm.
things, and then I review them and I clean them up and I simply delete the formal, the boilerplate parts of it. But now it requires some time. And right now I'm thinking like, okay, I have work. I also have a pet project, like game development related, and so I don't really want to spend time on sorting out the notes. So it's like in the shadowland, it's in the
Well,
purgatory.
and there's this thing in the background too, which is that there's an AI, and that AI, that technology is actually really good at all the things that I imagine you don't like doing out of what you just said, and definitely the things that I don't like doing, like
Mm,
categorization, making connections, all these things that require a huge amount of cognitive power to
mhm.
essentially like figure out, what Plato was talking about with the forms and such, and the categories and like intercategorical, all these things that are just really, really challenging for human beings is like really simple for the
Yeah.
AI. Do you agree with that? And if so, how is this influencing what you're working on?
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think like it probably there are even tools already that like something like a plugin for Obsidian or
Mm.
whatever that allows you to sort out everything pretty quickly. But it still needs like time and effort to investigate that and like to
The
find
plugins.
the plugin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it still needs some cognitive load. Like, okay, I
Yeah.
need to commit to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we I think many of us are also masters at procrastination. So
Well, and this brings into a really good mind because it already before the AI showed up, there's this sense where everything was all these little problems that we have, most of which are solved, particularly if you're a programmer. Somebody's already built the library or the framework, whatever you
yeah,
need. Somebody's already built that. And it's just a matter of finding it and then trying to do the work to actually determine whether it actually solves the problem.
yeah,
And that's why a
and
friend is
then
really good.
integrating it.
And then integrating it as well. And so that becomes the only work then. Like, and now AI has come into the conversation and says, okay, I can take over some of that. It would be interesting to ask you what parts of that the AI actually takes over. I can answer it a little bit for myself. The perplexity, I now use AI as my internal IT guy to go whenever I have a problem. I just talk with AI about it, and it usually solves the problem. But I have to go and do the things that it tells me to do. And but this activation energy is
Yes.
the key thing. Like as long as you have that activation maybe it's agency, maybe it is just agency, but there's a disconnect with our former life, which was like living in the nature, and like there are ways to use nature to solve our problems, and then we invented tools, and
Mhm.
like all of those things took amazing amounts of time, and we still and energy, and we still have that, like it still feels like the same thing every time I go and start something new, that it will require that like evolutionary, like just tons of energy and time, but it doesn't. It's really easy and simple. Well, and you
Yeah.
as a programmer, I know that you know this because there's two sides, which is that there's the implementation of this one tiny defined category, but then there's the solving a new type of problem that
Mhm.
nobody's solved before. What's your take on all that?
Mm, I think with programming and like with having problems and
Mm,
asking the AI assistant
mm,
what to do, and then you have the list of things to do.
uh-huh.
Uh, it's it's like a blessing and a curse
Yeah,
because from like on one hand, it's like you actually can have your all like not all but like most of your problems solved
yeah,
pretty quickly, pretty
yeah,
easily.
yeah.
But then you have to implement those like, yourself still, and I haven't seen like the product that would take ready like a full code base and change it at the proper places without errors. No, that doesn't exist yet. It's
Hmm.
probably like it's almost definitely a solvable problem at this point, but it still requires some amount of extra steps from somebody. It's not that easy. It's not a weekend task. It's not
Yeah.
probably even a couple of weeks.
Mm.
It requires a sizable amount of
Wait,
time,
wait, wait.
effort, money.
What specifically requires that?
Uh, like an application
Hmm.
that you could connect to your code base
Yeah,
and like say, okay, I have this bug here. Can you fix it for me, please?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the assistant kind of generates the steps, and then like some other part of that
yeah.
assistant resolves those steps and like changes the code. Because right now it's still sometimes very cumbersome. and you but at the same time it could have been more interesting to debug yourself. So it's a curse
Oh,
in the way that it might have been interesting to get into the code and solve, and then you would have performed all those steps
oh, interesting.
anyway. And it's like it would be more interesting, but knowing that the assistant will solve those for you, you go to the assistant and then you have all the steps solved, but then you have to implement them. And that's
Well, and
frustrating.
correct me if I'm wrong, that there's something that you as the programmer, as the person who's getting invested in this database or invested in this project, lose out by having the AI do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have the fun of like the fun of the challenge of fixing things or building them yourself, but it's
Mm.
usually like people usually go to the assistant with bugs, not with features. Features are much more fun to implement. Then you have bugs, then you seek advice, and then you're kind of stuck because you don't want to do the routine steps.
Okay, well, imagine a world 5 to 10 years away from now, which does have that application somebody built, and that you no longer need to go and find the bugs, and you no longer need to design the features. Are we living in a world where it's kind of like this strange Dolly world where somebody like you who enjoys doing all of those things, uh, like you'll probably go spend your time somewhere else, but if something goes wrong, or it's hard for me to envision this world 5 years ago. I imagine it's also difficult for you. It's like in that world, it's like the COBOL programmers. Like the COBOL programmers, they need to exist in finance world because some software is built on COBOL, and they're the only
Mhm.
ones who can do it. And I imagine that they get paid a lot of money to do it. And like now, add AI into the mix, what kind of world are we entering? Do you think there's an existential risk for our supply chain, for our systems, all those things in that world where AI takes care of most of it, but then there's something that we can't predict or something like that? Is there a risk there?
Yeah, I simply don't know.
Yeah, good answer.
But
Yeah.
my intuition tells me that there will be enough people who are simply interested in doing the stuff
Uh-huh.
without any AI assistance, simply because it's fun.
Yeah.
So there will be enough supply in like it would be kind of a seed freezing projects, like
Hmm.
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
plant seeds that are saved somewhere in a
Norway.
underground
Yeah.
vault, and that's not enough to like those seeds are definitely not enough to grow plants to feed everyone, but they're enough to unfold the program and like start multiplying, like grow, then take the seeds from those trees and like multiply, and then you can have crops enough to feed everyone like in I don't know 50 years. Like with trees it's probably more, but I mean you get the point.
Yeah, I
um,
do.
so I
It's
think it will be the same with programmers. So there will be people who are simply interested in building things, and specifically if we have UBI or whatever kind of everyone is fed and have shelter, uh, there will be people who dedicate their lives kind of living probably not monastically, not as in the medieval, but people who simply love to code and they know how to do it on different levels. They investigate for the sake of it, like for the sake of interest, and I believe they will be able to teach new people if things go wrong. So if something goes terribly wrong, like not terribly, like existentially terribly, but if, for example, the AI assist, like not assistance at that point, but like the AI program makers, program writers, if they make completely illegible programs that cannot be modified by humans because they are unreadable,
Oh,
uh, that's a possibility. You don't have like we have now like human readable programming code because we need to modify it as humans, but that's a like intermediary step. You can
whoa.
basically write you can generate binary code at some point, or some like some
Other
other
symbolic.
intermediate, yeah, some symbolic stuff that compiles into that is not easily readable by humans, and so that would be much more hard to debug, and that might contain very like, for example, I don't believe that critical infrastructure software will be replaced in the next like 20 years simply because of the regulation. No one will allow machines to write code for like planes
Oh,
or atomic bombs
oh,
or like anything. So we will have programmers for those things at least for a long time from
very
now.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Now, what you said, there's a new symbolic thing, and I want to understand more, maybe if anybody's actually already doing that. Well, whether there's any benefit for the AI to go off in its own language, that is there any like real benefit to an AI creating its own symbolic language or even using the machine code? There's that question as well, but there's also the monastery thing that you mentioned. And Samo Berja on Twitter has this great tweet, which he
Yes.
says, "Why are there no monasteries dedicated to maintaining and perfecting software?"
Yeah, I
And
saw it today.
yeah, okay,
But I have the notion of a code monastery from like 10 years ago.
well, but yeah, why not? And then somebody else responded that there is a monastery in Wyoming that is developing automated CNC milking and other technologies, which is wild. So, but
Yeah.
it's very solar punk. It's a very solar punk thing of this
Yes.
and I know that 10 years ago I was tracking Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese monk in the Buddhist tradition
Mhm.
who started getting really popular. I think it's probably because Salesforce and Salesforce had a conference, and I know a lot of Plum Village monasteries, but they started getting popular among programmers in San Francisco. And one of my friends went to Plum Village in France or something like that, and they were building, like he was trying to incentivize people to do more meditation, combine programming and meditation, which is a
Mhm.
really interesting thing. We could talk about that, or we could go back to that question. I kind of want to talk more about that. What's your take on that? Why there is this monastic combination with software? Why is there that
Mm.
thing?
Yeah, I think it's similar with the general monastery, like tradition of monasteries existing.
Mm.
So it's like the first monasteries were hubs of knowledge, and like they recreated books, they wrote books, like they usually copied books at
Yeah,
first, but they copied the Bible and the sacred scriptures. But besides that, they at some point monastery monks started being scribes, and they were usually like the only educated people, the only literate people on vast areas of land.
interesting.
And it's not about like, I mean, probably in some way it's like you know how they say sometimes that programming is the new literacy. So it's like
Yep.
almost every, like in the developed countries, almost everyone is literate, or maybe not everyone, but it's like well beyond 90%. Uh, so now the new literacy is programming, which is still like the trade of a few. It's like not that many people know how to program, especially like professionally, as like making architecture,
Mm,
making decisions about algorithmic complexity, and so on and so on.
mm,
So it's like
mm,
pretty many people know how to make a simple script in Python because it's taught in schools, um, but not many people can build a Facebook
yeah.
or like anything of that scale. And so I think people living or contributing or being part of those half monastic orders, they will comprise those hubs of people who know how to do things, how to do technical things. That's I also think it's very aesthetically pleasing. It's very beautiful in a way. So it's like, yes, it's solar punk. Uh,
You mean the monastery itself?
yeah, yeah. it has the vibe of so like of something beautiful, serene. People don't have to survive, and they just can commit themselves to like serving uh, some kind of divinity, and why not in the form of code?
It's really interesting. I love what you said about the beautiful, serene thing because it kind of reminds me of Steve Jobs. Although Steve Jobs took much more of an interest in the Eastern traditions, but the same basic idea. Whether you go, I
Mm,
spent time in monasteries in the East and with in the Buddhist tradition, and I've spent time in monasteries not as a priest or anything like that, but I've been around monasteries in the West as well in terms of the Christian tradition,
mm,
and it's both very different aesthetics, but
yeah.
at the visual sense, but the general, it's very clean, it's very
Hmm.
empty, and
Yeah.
it's like the function is there, which is to devote yourself to the sacred and such, and only have that. It's very very focused on that in both cases, which I find very interesting. And now,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, I'm probably a little bit affected by Kingdom Come Deliverance, which I'm playing right now. So that's why I mentioned firstly the Western monasteries, because yeah, they're different. The vibe is different, but they all fit the solar punk theme. So both fit like perfectly. If
interesting.
we, I mean, if we take the Eastern monastic tradition and like a temple or a monastery there, and kind of push it into the future, into the solar punk age, it fits
Ooh,
perfectly. And if we take Western, like Franciscan monastery, and push it to the future, into the solar punk age, it also fits perfectly in a very different way, but it still has a
yeah,
place there.
yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. The Kingdom Come Deliverance sounds interesting. It's a historically accurate game. I'll go check that out later to maybe play it. Well, what have you been learning about history from it?
Oh, I think it's first of all, it's very immersive. It's very believable. You exist there, and y obviously there are simplifications and like gamifications of some things, because it's like it would be extremely boring if you had to live really as a person in the medieval. Uh, but it highlights specific parts of life that makes it very recognizable and very uh, trustworthy. So you're like really in that age, in that place. You don't have that many UI. Uh, like there is no UI overlay almost. So you
Hmm.
don't have. Sometimes you don't have even the marker for the quest on the map. So you have the textual explanation from a book, like where to find this or that guy, and you have to go there and ask people around and find some landmarks and find the place. So that's fantastic. That's uh, the last time that happened was probably like in big gaming. It was probably in Morrowind in 2022, or I mean 2002 or 2003. So it's pretty
Morrowind,
much remarkable.
Elder Scrolls. Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. So there's a bunch of follow-up questions I want to ask about the last stuff we've been talking about, but now I got a new one, which is the gaming industry. Have you started to see games using, like, you reminded me of it in our initial talk about Unity and the other one, but
Yeah,
the Unreal.
Unreal.
Yeah, okay. So you've got Unity and you've got Unreal, and my understanding of these engines is that they're becoming incredibly more lifelike. Is that because of AI? Is that accurate?
Not
Realistic.
really.
Mm,
Not really. No,
mm,
no. It's like how to put it. It's the engines themselves. Those are like frameworks, like programming frameworks,
uh,
to build virtual worlds, like to build game worlds.
oh,
They are not necessarily realistic. So the engines themselves, they have all the tools for you to build the underlying structure for any game. It might be
Got it.
Mario, it might
Got it.
be Skyrim, it might be some visualization of a of an interior design piece, anything like that. Like, so basically, you can build something, and that something can be interactive, and the engine provides you with the tools and abstractions to build that and to build it much more quickly than you would have done like on your own, writing in
Mm.
pure language. Um, and on top of that, there are many artists. Some of them use AI tools, some don't. Both achieve highly detailed realism in their works. It depends like on their
Got it.
pipeline. So it's
Okay.
like many artists, and they do that usually outside of Unreal Engine or Unity,
Oh,
and they make it in like Maya, Substance Designer. Like, I don't remember the names of many tools there because I'm not an artist, and I mean, I'm not a visual artist at least. Uh, and so they make those assets that are like after they export them from their program, it's embeddable in the engine, and so you can make a game and then you can borrow, buy, order like an asset from artists. You can put those assets in your game and make those assets interactive. So it's like add some actions to them. You can like have a sword in the hand of your character and mountains built by someone else, and then like horses built by someone else,
mm.
like, and so on.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. What do you think? So you've got a whole bunch of stakeholders, and you got these Unity, you got the game engines, which just are basically like frameworks for developing games. Are
Mhm.
inside the gaming world, is it becoming possible for someone like you, just a single person, to start creating sort of crazy, fantastical games, just on your own power, or like, is there still a lot of benefit to having a game studio? I guess game studios create a whole bunch of different games, and they
Mhm.
just create game after game after game in order to test the market continuously. Can you talk more about how like AI or the other things we've been talking about are changing the game industry?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, both like regular, let's call them that, regular tools and AI tools. I think they operate pretty unevenly. So they allow you to make visuals fantastic much more easily. So you can now be extremely swift. And like on top of that, there are free assets in the stores, both for Unity and Unreal, because like either the companies that create those engines or artists sometimes share their works for free, and so you have immense capabilities to build visually fascinating worlds. But then on the side of game design and like gaming experience and actual controls, character develop like not character development, but like sort of stats and skills
Yeah.
systems in RPG games, interactions with the pieces in the world, like all the mini games, like imagine GTA,
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
It's like there is so much of like content that's not simply visuals or not simply music or like sound. It's a combination of many things and also like some gameplay on top of that. Those are not that easily done. So you can do
Oh.
like, definitely there are much more tools right now than 10 years before, 20 years before, and much more hardware power. So you don't have to optimize that
Oh. Yep.
like
Hmm.
that much. But still, if you want to build a Witcher 3, Cyberpunk 2077, or a GTA, you will need a real game studio. It's games of that scale are impossible to build on one's own. Like, absolutely no.
So I've had this sort of thing, and it might be the same thing that causes boomers to say bad things about the millennials, but I have this thing where like I started playing video games with Civilization 2, or actually, well,
Mhm.
this first Civilization, and then the Civilization 2, and I absolutely loved Civilization 2, and then Red Alert 2. Um, and it feels like to me, as the power of these games has gotten better and better and better, the games play themselves hasn't actually increased. But I imagine that you might disagree with me on that. And do you agree? Do you disagree? What's your thought on that?
You mean like the gameplay, the quality of the
The
mechanics of the
Yeah,
game?
well, maybe not necessarily the mechanics, but I guess the combination of the story, the mechanics, the whole thing, in how sort of creative it was. It feels like the lack of constraints has
Mhm.
actually, and maybe something else in the terms of the market as well, and like who
Mhm.
games are for, and once the games actually started to become open to a much wider range of people or something like that. What do you think?
Uh, okay, I somewhat agree with that. So there's definitely a lot of evidence that some games and some popular games specifically has become not better, if not worse.
Hmm.
Uh, but the game, like all the like combination of I mean, both visuals and mechanics and gameplay ideas and so on and so on. All of those are spaces when you can find new ideas and
Mm, mm,
improve on former ideas. And in those spaces, the progress is made. And like
mm,
separately, it's definitely made on all fronts. Uh, Sometimes, and I believe in absolute terms, there are more games now than
yeah,
before
yeah,
that are good and
yeah.
that are
Interesting.
better than the games before because they take all those, like many of those improved parts in those spaces, and they combine them masterfully, and you have a great game. But simply because of the sheer amount of all games in general, and some spend much more on marketing than on development.
Yeah, yeah.
You have, I don't know, I don't want to blackmouth anyone, if that's a word. So
Yeah.
there are games that are kind of extremely popular, pretty beautiful, but they lack something. They lack new ideas. They lack experimentation because most of all large companies they are afraid of experimentation because
Mm,
when you're experimenting you may lose your audience and you may lose money, and since
mm,
large companies are usually they're many of them are post IPO companies that they which like for their top tier management shareholder value is
the
primary
only thing.
concern.
Yeah, the only thing.
Yeah, so they're thinking about that, and even if the team is great, that is making the actual game,
Yeah,
they have so much pressure from
yeah,
the top
yeah, yeah.
on like moving in the direction of increasing the value. I mean monetary value, that they have to withdraw from making progress on the game development.
And this is why indie games can create some amazing games, is they don't have the same level of pressure. Uh,
Yes, yes, in the games, and I would say like lower tier than say Blizzard, EA, and so on,
yeah.
studios that have publishers and they might have a lot of money. So it's like uh,
Mm,
Kingdom Come Deliverance is a somewhat indie game in a
got it.
way,
Got it.
but they still have like probably millions of dollars in investment before they actually launched the game. Uh,
This
it's still a lot of money. Still, we cannot call that like purely indie now.
it
But
gets it gets
yeah,
into such an interesting conversation about commerce versus art. And like, why is there such a tension between commerce and art? Because it's not only gaming where this exists; it also
yes.
exists in movies. It exists in music, um, and like it gets into creativity as well. Because I I started the show many years ago with the relationship between stress and creativity, and I don't think that art, that stress. I mean, I don't think that creativity is only art. I think you can be creative in programming. I think you can be creative in finance. But this tension between commerce and art is so interesting because it's like there's a great word called enshittification. So many of our things are becoming so much shittier,
Yes.
and it feels like it's because of a lack of creative understanding in terms of the
Mhm.
connection between shareholder value and good quality, and like all these things that could be good quality aren't because of this sort of nebulous shareholder quality and like bad decisions that are being made at the top. But is it? But who knows? This is all a question. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think generally that happens in waves, and
Mhm.
when the discrepancy becomes too large, there is a rift between like the artistic value of a piece of art and shareholder value for the company that produces it. And so on that rift, there appear new players. It's like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
the wilderness that appears there. It's like you can imagine uh, like there is a city where all the management sits, and that city it has a lot of money and it's beautiful, but all the
uh,
work is done somewhere. And then by some magical occurrence, it's like the city and the artisan shops, they are becoming more and more separated. And then in that empty space in between, there are rogues, and if there's sea, there are pirates. And among those rogues, someone is pretty smart, and they think like, what if we start paying those artisans fewer money, but we will allow them more freedom, and so they can pay. And so there are more experiment acceptable publishers now. Much more like in the game development world, there are much more publishers that are more risky. They invest in bold, promising projects, even if that doesn't pay out, simply because they they sometimes
yeah,
come out from the scene. So they are sometimes developers themselves, and then they become publishers, and many of them don't want to become those dragons. They don't want to slay the dragons. They're just trying to create a new scene where good things happen, and that's beautiful. And a lot of that, by the way, a lot of that can be seen here in Serbia. Even though, of course, like I mean, in Serbia, game development is one of
okay.
the top 10 industries. Yeah.
Wait, oh, so Serbia is actually a big gaming industry place.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
And it all started like not that very artistic, probably. So
yeah,
there are many kind of pretty shitty mobile games,
yes,
or like I don't know, three in a row, that kind of stuff. But then the existence of people who simply know how to build games, uh, there's
yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of horizontal connections, and people started like, what if we make a game? And then the Balkans generally, like the Eastern Europe part of the Balkans, um, it's like there are many projects
mm,
that are independent and beautiful and well made, and so they're really interesting.
interesting. Okay, so what you were saying about the experimentation, and you didn't say it, but I imagine that it's also part of the what you're saying is that there's this experimentation versus exploitation, and it's and I don't mean
Mhm.
exploitation in the political sense. I'm saying exploiting. So as you experiment, you find something
Yeah.
to exploit, and then you go and you focus totally all your energies on exploiting that. The big thing
Mhm.
would be like scaling a company versus creating the company. And so it's a very interesting point because I thought so much about it. As this podcast kind of shows, I'm very much more in the explorative thing than I am better at exploiting things.
Mhm.
And so it's something I think about all the time. What is your thought on exploration versus? Have you ever worked in a very large company?
Uh, no.
No. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
then that was mostly a conscious decision,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I made my way into one. It wasn't even a very large company, but it was large enough for me to understand what happens in a large company.
Yeah,
And
it's similar
yeah,
for me. I
yeah,
worked at a company with like maybe 1,000 people,
mm,
like approximately.
yeah.
I worked there for 8 or 9 months,
Mm.
and then I dropped out of there.
Yeah.
And
Because it gets into knowledge management. We can actually spend the last 10 minutes talking about the knowledge management side of that. Because as we got started, we were talking about personal knowledge management.
mhm,
But then there's, as I discovered at the company, then there is knowledge management that's shared in the organization. And I was actually the director of knowledge management.
mhm,
And that was quite a challenging role because I had only thought about personal knowledge management. I had thought quite deeply about personal knowledge management before. And then I was all of a sudden responsible for a company of 22,000 people for their knowledge management, how to do knowledge management at the company. And it was like, I still am stuck on a 5-person knowledge management, let alone
mhm.
knowledge management for 2,000 people. What is your thought about going from one to many in terms of knowledge management?
Well, if it's in a company, then hierarchy helps immensely because you can, like, if you have hierarchy in the company, you obviously do have it in a large company, then you have teams and you can uh, pretty much isolate the spaces for the teams.
Mm,
And you can even, like, the rules for those spaces shouldn't be uniform. So you can tap
mm,
into the wisdom of each team and devise something for what works for them. And then the next step, especially feasible with AI tools, is interconnect those separate spaces in a like kind of queried read-only ways when you can, like, if you search something, then like you have on that knowledge base, then you have the results from your knowledge base, and then like and other teams, and these, that, and that, and the structure is different, and probably the AI can generate some tips on the structure and on how to navigate that other teams knowledge base. But I would say it's very wise to split them into many, because
yeah.
like sustaining some large big graph with uh, you will have you will need to have pretty restrictive rules for
Uh-huh.
that to work, and that will clog people's pipelines,
Yeah.
because if you need to account for like a list of 10, like a checklist of 10 rules, to like, okay, I shouldn't do this, I should do this, people will stop taking notes on their work, and then the actual state of business in the company and the knowledge management state will simply divert from each other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You brought up a bunch of points that were related to our earlier conversation about the organic versus inorganic knowledge structure. And for people like
Yeah.
us who think about this, like we already recognize the importance of the discipline aspect of it. And I mean the tyrant discipline here, because it gets back to something I wanted to talk about too, which is that um, the key problem both in personal knowledge management and even way worse inside of a company is the needle in the haystack problem, which is that we live in such an information rich environment. But even if you're out in the forest, it's still the same problem, which is like, where did I put that thing? That thing was really important. Where did I put it? And okay, I'll
Mhm.
develop a system where I'll put that thing in the same place each time. But then, oh, that thing is part of this category, but it's not really part of that category. Oh, now I got to think about the category, so it's just like totally
Mhm.
crazy where you can go once you start doing that thing. And so it's the needle in the haystack, and then like that problem, there's the way you get around it is you build the system, and it needs to be some sort of mixture of organic and inorganic with not too much of a tyrant in there. And then but it's all about capturing. Whenever you find something, you need to
Mhm.
capture that thing, and that's where the discipline comes in. I feel like that's where there's no a way around getting that out of that particular discipline problem, which is that you
Mhm.
need to capture it in a way that you will then remember where you put it the last time. And the way that works for me now is like actually I have two ways where it's I just send a text to myself on WhatsApp. And so that's how I can, if I'm out on the go, if I need to remember a person's name or like some sort, it's usually a jargon, piece of jargon that's the
Mhm.
way to get back to that. Because now if you know the jargon, then you can go use AI. It's crazy different from the way that used to work in societies and civilization is because you used to
Yeah,
have to go find the guy who knows about that thing or find the book. Um,
yeah.
and so you've got that, the other way now is I just put it directly into my spaced repetition. If I see something that I want to record, then I'll put it in the spaced repetition. But yeah,
Mhm.
last few minutes. Any thoughts on that?
Uh, yeah, I was thinking about the case for companies, and I think one 2080 solution, which might be very powerful, is to add personal overlays for everyone on the in the company. So it's like you have the knowledge base,
Mm.
and then for everyone
Yeah, yeah,
you may
exactly.
have like favorites, and people can tag the data they find in the knowledge base, and they
Yeah,
can
yeah,
tag it as favorite, and they can put a small note. It's by default probably visible to everybody, but not by default shown. So it's
yeah,
like it's discoverable. And if you want to discover what other people marked as important, you can find that, but it's not clogging everything on the screen because there are 20,000 people in the company. But you can see, you can make queries like, what are the uh, lines in the knowledge base that most people marked as important, and
yeah,
that can allow you to that may allow you to find really relevant pieces of information that are company wise important, and you can make digest of those, like weekly digest of the most important, like top 5 things that everybody
mm.
on the company mark, like not everybody, but like 15% of the employees marked this as important. Probably you should know about this. That might be interesting.
I wish I had talked to you back a year ago. But well, cool. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And how can people find out more about what you're working on and what you're building?
I think my Twitter is the best way to discover everything.
Mm-hmm. And what is that again?
I might shit post a little bit too much, but
Well,
I will believe this.
if they found me, if they're listening to this podcast, they're probably pretty used to my shit posting all the time on this. I'm sure it'll be fine. And so, can you remind me what is your Twitter?
It's bliss tweeting. I can send it to the chat as well.
Okay. And let me I want to make sure I bring it up so I can so that people can have the spelling. Bliss tweeting. Yeah. So at Bliss tweeting, BLISSTWEETING. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. It was an incredible talk. Thank